It is now time for the opening session, so allow me to invite all speakers for the opening remarks on the stage. May I first invite Mr. Larry Maramis, Director for Cross-Sectoral Cooperation, Directorate, ASEAN Secretariat. Next, may I invite Dr. Piche Durongkowerod, Minister for Science and Technology, Royal Thai Government. Ambassador Philippe Zeller, Diplomatic Counselor to the French Government and Ambassador of COP21 for Asia. Mrs. Louisa Roguer, Charge d'Affaires, European Union Delegation to Thailand. And Professor Warasak Ganok Nukunchai, President of AIT. Please be seated. Thank you. And now I would like to invite Mr. Larry Maramis, Director for Cross-Sectoral Cooperation, Directorate, ASEAN Secretariat, to give the first opening remarks.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome and a good morning to all of you. ASEAN is very proud to be part of this regional forum on climate change, precisely because this is a unique opportunity to examine together just how much our lives, our well-being, our livelihoods have brought about climate change, and how we might be adjusting to living with climate change now and in the future. There is no question that this region is among the most climate change vulnerable, given our long coastlines, the high concentration of population and economic activity in coastal areas, and heavy reliance on agriculture, fisheries, forestry, and other natural resources. Working through such vulnerabilities, our region basks in success as an economic powerhouse and a remarkable story of growth, wealth generation, and economic integration. These are remarkable human achievements that have lifted millions from poverty. But the backstory is of human actions of such incomprehensible scale that they are transforming the ASEAN landmass, our waters, and our atmosphere. Advances in climate change, in climate science, and as you heard earlier, on adaptation science, as well as in climate economics, are informing us just how much our actions are inducing climate change. Concurrently and with increasing vigor, a new discourse on climate ethics and morality are shaping the region's climate change agenda, and increasingly in the political sphere. Indeed, this is a unique opportunity to share the latest research knowledge, practical experiences of the ASEAN peoples, stakeholders, and its partners for a new generation of climate change public policies. The impact of extreme events to society and ASEAN integration have shaken fundamental assumptions of regional cooperation. The intensity and regularity of disasters have brought about urgency in adopting risk reduction approaches to addressing unpredictable and extreme events and make preparations to surviving them. Today's climate change public discourse is being forged on issues of sustainability and resilience, and we must encourage public, private, and even personal actions to take on climate change, water scarcity, skill shortages, and we must incorporate disaster preparedness and humanitarian interventions in these. If the regional mechanism is regarded as the first choice of response to coordinate resources and capacities, then we need robust institutions to deal with increasingly complex interplay of cross-cutting issues collaboration and coordination mechanisms, and resource management. A clean and green ASEAN requires fully established mechanisms to ensure protection of environment, sustainability of natural resources, and high quality of life of its people. It was against this backdrop that ASEAN leaders issued the ASEAN Declaration to institutionalize resilience in disasters and climate change in April this year in Malaysia. The declaration sets out a whole-of-government approach that melds together disaster and climate change resilience. It calls us on us in government specifically and generally in the public to implement economic, social, cultural, physical, and environmental measures to address the exposure and vulnerability to the risks. It also calls on us to systematize disaster risk management and climate change adaptation and cross-pillar and cross-sectoral collaboration. It calls on us to institutionalize disaster risk management and climate change adaptation at the national and local levels with existing and new policies and legal frameworks. It encourages us to participate, stakeholders to participate in planning and implementing disaster risk management and climate change adaptation, and to accelerate public and private sector investments. We also are asked to be more risk aware, to address underlying risk drivers that compound our behavior and to help also to foster an understanding on the extent of the risks and share information on risk and development. We've been also seeking and building more capacity to strengthen our national and regional institutions to monitor and reduce risks. And finally, the declaration asks us to cooperate, to enhance the cooperation on disaster management and emergency response, in strengthening disaster resilience at all levels and reducing vulnerabilities of the affected populations. So the type of capacities that are needed in a increasingly difficult climate change scenario will be in public policy formulation, in the formulation of programs and operational skills on cross-cutting issues, in monitoring and risk analysis and reduction and vulnerability assessment, in building multi-stakeholder partnerships, in mobilizing resources not just from traditional sources but from non-traditional sources as well, and to coordinate and do effective organizational development to change and re-engineer our institutions. And as you heard from the earlier keynote speakers, also to find ways to effectively advocate and bring out that message to the public at large. Now, ASEAN has a great stake and abiding interest in effective international and regional response to climate change. And we have consistently articulated an active regional stance in the global community. We are committed to a successful UNFCCC second COP, or the 21st COP, which the ASEAN leaders have articulated in its statement at the 25th ASEAN Summit in Naypyidaw in November 2014. And that calls for all parties to the UNFCCC, including ASEAN member states, to work effectively and in good faith to adopt a protocol, another legal instrument, or an agreed outcome with legal force under the convention applicable to all by the end of 2015, and to table their intended nationally determined contributions well in advance of COP21 in Paris in December 2015, or by the first quarter of 2016 for those parties that are ready. 2015, but for those parties who are ready to do so. The stakeholders and participants here today only serve to enhance and enrich this forum. We value your knowledge, the information and experience that you're going to be presenting before us, but our aspirations and our intended outcomes should be tempered and balanced to allow policymakers and advisors to formulate effective and practical policies in living with and adapting to climate change to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, and to strengthen the ASEAN community. Thank you very much.
Rongkowerod, Minister for Science and Technology, Royal Thai Government, to deliver the next opening remarks.
Excellency, former President Jose Ramos Horta, Ambassador Thierry Vitu, Mr. Larry Maramis, Mrs. Luisa Rager, Ambassador Philippe Zeller, Professor Warasak Kanok Nukunchai, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very happy to be here with you all at this regional forum on climate change, low carbon, and climate resilient societies to bridge science, practice, and policy together. This forum comes at a very opportune time, given that climate change concerns worldwide are escalating by the day. Literature is abundant with burgeoning evidence in support of climate change impacts on virtually all sectors and sections of society. Until some time back, only scientists were convinced of the implication of climate change. Today, policymakers and governments are also in the same boat. As has been the case with other major global concerns in the past, there are skeptics to this phenomenon as well. However, the bottom line about climate change is this: science has shown that humans are responsible for the bulk of climate change. Therefore, it is our common responsibility to leave this planet in better shape for the future generations than we found it. This year at the COP21 in Paris, we hope that we will have a chance to witness history being made in a form of a new climate agreement applicable for all countries post-2020. However, this will be just the first, albeit most significant step in instituting a climate-secure future. What will be required more and more in the days to come is climate evidence-based policy to foster on-the-ground implementation of remedial measures. We will need more innovative ways to diffuse science into policy and reduce the time that it takes for policy to be implemented. I'm delighted that this forum seeks to address this very imminent and pertinent need. We need more of such interactions between the vast arrays of stakeholders from diverse sectors in order to paint a complete picture of how to effectively address the questions posed by climate change. I congratulate the organizers and the partners of this forum for their vision and appreciate the efforts taken by them in organizing this event. I wish you all a wonderful and productive forum. I want to leave you with the words of former United States Senator from Connecticut, Joe Lieberman. Climate change is not a conqueror to kneel before, but a challenge to rise to. A challenge we must rise to. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Pichette. And now we have a video message from Mr. Nicolas Hulot, Special Envoy of the French President for the Protection of the Planet.
Ces changements climatiques parce que l'enjeu climatique conditionne tous les enjeux de solidarité auxquels vous et nous sommes attachés. Évidemment, les pays les plus émetteurs qui ont une responsabilité historique doivent plus encore que les autres affirmer leurs ambitions et les concrétiser à Paris. La bonne nouvelle, c'est que le changement est déjà en marche. Nous ne sommes pas démunis, nous ne sommes pas dans une impasse. Les technologies sont en train de foisonner pour répondre aux enjeux climatiques, notamment la multiplication et la diversification des énergies renouvelables dont l'efficacité énergétique est en train de se développer en même temps que leur coût ne cesse de descendre. La diversification des énergies renouvelables associée à l'efficacité énergétique qui permettra de réduire, quel que soit le modèle énergétique que nous allons choisir, de réduire notre consommation et donc notre production. Et tout l'argent que nous ne mettrons pas dans l'énergie, on pourra le réinjecter dans le social, dans l'éducation, dans la santé ou dans l'adaptation pour les pays qui sont déjà impactés par les changements climatiques. Et quant aux énergies renouvelables, imaginez, et c'est un rêve qui est à notre portée, que la contrainte climatique nous oblige à accélérer le développement de ces énergies renouvelables et à permettre à chaque État, chaque nation, petite, grande, moyenne, de produire à terme la majorité de son énergie à l'intérieur de ses frontières, à partir de sources d'énergie qui à terme sont gratuites. Le vent, le soleil, la géothermie, l'énergie des mers est gratuite. Vous allez rétablir l'équité du monde et pacifier le monde parce qu'il ne vous aura pas échappé que la majorité des conflits auxquels nous avons assisté depuis quelques décennies étaient directement ou indirectement liés au pétrole, au gaz ou au charbon. Tout ça pour dire que l'enjeu climatique, c'est une contrainte, certes, mais c'est aussi une magnifique opportunité si nous sommes capables de nous doter d'un état d'esprit universel. Un état d'esprit universel, c'est que chacun intègre qu'à Paris, nous serons tous gagnants ou tous perdants. Et l'opportunité, c'est que pour la première fois dans l'histoire des relations internationales, il y a un enjeu qui vaut pour tous les continents, pour toutes les cultures, qui nous oblige à nous retrouver non pas sur ce qui nous ressemble, mais sur ce qui nous rassemble et à mettre en commun ce que nous avons de meilleur. Voilà l'objet de Paris, voilà pourquoi 2015 est un moment de vérité pour l'humanité. Je voudrais
Following this message, let us now hear the remarks delivered by Ambassador Philippe Zeller, diplomatic counselor to the French government and ambassador of COP21 for Asia.
Minister, Excellency President José Ramos Horta, Professor Warzak, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, let me first express the pleasure we have, my colleague Thierry Vito, Ambassador of France to Thailand, my colleagues of the French embassies here and in Jakarta, to be here and to have such an occasion of meeting with Asian partners involved in preparing the COP21. I have three messages. The first one, July the 1st, we are halfway through a year, 2015, throughout which the focus is on development and the climate. The Addis Abeba conference in July on financing for development, the New York summit in September on sustainable development goals, and finally COP21 in Paris in December in 150 days will define a new international framework of action to reconcile everyone's aspiration to prosperity on one side with the natural limits of our planet on the other side. We must prepare these three landmark meetings so that they are interlinked. We will not win the battle for development and for eliminating poverty without winning the battle against climate change, or as we now prefer to say, climate disruption, because it's not only a question of climate change, but very tangible climate disruption. Second message, France, with enthusiasm, and you just saw Monsieur Hulot, who is a special advisor to our President François Hollande, how he is enthusiastic to prepare the COP21. France is facing up the responsibility of its future presidency with a determination to succeed and a commitment at the highest level of government. Still with the cooperation of our Peruvian friends, the whole French diplomatic network is working actively to this end on a daily basis. In our capacity of incoming presidency, we are working with all countries transparently to set out a collective ambition, address the expectations of all countries, particularly the most vulnerable, and ASEAN countries are among the most vulnerable, and reach the compromises that will enable us to achieve a consensus in Paris among 196 parties, 195 countries, and the European Union being a party. The many discussions we are having confirm that all countries want to achieve a universal agreement in December. We must now produce concrete results at each meeting in order to build the result in Paris. Our goal is to build a Paris Alliance for Climate, enabling us to limit the planet's average temperature rise to less than 1.5 degree or 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, and adapt our societies to deal with the existing disruption. Third message, this Paris Alliance for Climate, will have 4 aspects. The first one, the main one in a way, is the universal agreement in accordance with the Durban mandate, establishing rules and mechanisms capable of progressively achieving the goal of respecting this limit of 2 degrees Celsius or even less, this limit having been suggested by the IPCC report, as it was just said a few minutes ago. Second pillar of the alliance, the presentation by all countries of the famous now INPCs ahead of the COP21, because it's very important to know at the beginning of the COP what will be the difference between the amount of all the INPCs and this target of less than 2 degrees Celsius, in order to create a ripple effect and show that all countries are moving ahead in the same direction, depending on their national situation. That's a bottom-up procedure, and we are very happy to see that we have now collected around more than 40 indices, and still expecting, and yesterday was a very important day because China just released In Paris, it's INDC, and we are hoping to collect them or to have them being released, a majority of them in the next weeks during months of July, August, and September. The third pillar will be the financial aspect, the famous $100 billion every year beginning in 2020, which must support developing countries and enable the transition to the resilient and low-carbon economy. And the fourth one, which is perhaps a more optimistic one, and just as Mr. Nicolas Hulot explained, the strengthening of the commitments already made and coming from civil society and non-state actors and of multi-partner initiatives in what we call the Lima Paris Action Agenda, in order to involve all stakeholders and begin concrete action without waiting for the future agreement to come into force in 2020. To conclude, these four elements are complementary and will be mutually reinforced in order to give our fellow citizens, local authorities, and businesses a clear signal that we are embarking on a resolute transition to low-carbon economies while guaranteeing everyone fair access to sustainable development. I wish the best for this forum, and thank you again for all participants, all authorities which have prepared this forum. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the remarks, Your Excellency. Join me now in welcoming Mrs. Louisa Reguer, Charge d'Affaires, European Union Delegation to Thailand, to deliver the next opening remarks.
His Excellency Dr. Pichet, the Minister of Science, His Excellency Jose Ramos Horta, the former President of Timor-Leste, Ambassador Zeller, Professor Warsak, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me a great pleasure and honor to welcome you on behalf of the European Union to this three-day regional forum on climate change, the event which promotes the discussion and exchanges on science, practice, policy for further realizing low-carbon and climate societies. Let me congratulate the lead organizer, AIT, for having attracted such a high number of prominent participants from the science community, practitioners, and policymakers. The European Union is proud to have been involved in this organization. Climate change is one of the major challenges of the 21st century. The impact of climate change is being felt on all continents and is predicted to intensify in the coming decades. ASEAN countries are already experiencing the adverse effects of climate change. Multiple challenges of water scarcity, rising temperatures, more frequent droughts, rising sea levels, and increasing flooding have been witnessed and will continue to make the region a climate change hotspot if no effective measures are taken. Climate change will affect the way we live. If we carry on living the way we have been doing up to now, consuming and producing the way we are, coupled with a sharp increase in population, according to the UNEP International Resource Panel, it is estimated that by 2050, we could be using about 140 billion tons of minerals, ores, fossil fuels, biomass per year. Hence, 3 planets' worth of natural resources to maintain our ways of living. Unfortunately, we only have 1 planet. We have to come up with an effective solution to accelerate enough the reduction of global greenhouse gas emissions in order to keep the world temperatures increase below the 2 degrees Celsius, which is the overall target we are all aiming at. This calls for the widest possible cooperation by all professions from all countries, and it calls for us to act together now. Let me take a few minutes to share with you what we in the European Union have been doing and plan to do. By 2020, the EU aimed at achieving 20% reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. I'm pleased to inform you that now by 2014, we had already achieved around 19% reduction, and we are on course to reduce emissions by 25% by 2020, beating our 20% target. While we are making good progress towards meeting our climate energy targets for 2020, we continue to pursue more ambitious targets, as demonstrated by our contribution to the new agreement, the INDCs, which were mentioned earlier on, that we submitted in early March. The EU and its 28 member states committed to a new binding target of 40% reduction of greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 in comparison to the 1990 levels. To achieve the overall 40% target, an integrated policy framework has been put in place to ensure regulatory certainty for investors and a coordinated approach among member states. This 2030 policy framework aims at creating a more competitive and a climate-friendly European Union economy and energy market. It consists of the following elements: reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 43% in the sectors covered by the EU emissions trading scheme and 30% from sectors outside the EU ETS compared to 2005 levels. This translates into an annual decline of 2.2% from 2021 onwards instead of the 1.74% up to 2020. Increasing of the share of renewable energy to at least 27%, increasing energy efficiency by at least 27%, and a new, reliable and transparent governance system based on national plans and a set of key indicators to assess progress over time. Ladies and gentlemen, having an integrated policy framework in place is an important piece of a complex puzzle, but it needs to be complemented by resources, both human and financial. Let me just briefly give you an overview of the European Union funding plans. The EU has agreed that at least 20% of its budget for the period 2014-2020 should be spent on climate change-related action. This budget marks a major step forward in transforming Europe into a clean and competitive low-carbon economy. Moreover, in helping developing countries adapt to the impacts of climate change, the EU development policy will contribute with an estimated 14 billion over the period 2014-2020 for climate spending. Ladies and gentlemen, 2015 is a decisive year for international climate negotiations. The current negotiation process, as mandated by the Durban Plan of Actions, aim at a new global climate agreement in December at COP21 in Paris. This new binding agreement will target strong reduction of carbon emissions. Currently, only some countries have communicated their intended contributions to the UNFCCC. I'd like to take this opportunity to encourage all countries represented here today to submit their contributions well ahead of Paris. We need to have every country on board in order to assess if our combined contributions are robust enough to reach the objective of keeping the temperature rise below the 2 degrees Celsius. The European Union stands by its responsibility in providing support on mitigation and adaptation to partner countries around the world. We hope that this 3 days forum and the third EU-ASEAN dialogue, which will take place on Friday, will result in an inspirational ASEAN position for climate negotiation at the global scale. Timing is running out. We have to act now, and we have to act together. With this, I wish you a very profitable and successful event and look forward to hearing the results at the end of the 3 days.
Thank you, Mrs. Reguer. May I now invite Professor Warasakanok Nukunchai, AT President, to give his opening remarks.
Excellencies, former Presidents of Timor-Leste, Mr. Jose Ramos Horta, Excellency Dr. Pichet Dulongkawirot, Honorable Minister of Science and Technology of Thailand, Excellencies, the Ambassador of France to Thailand, Sir Thierry Bitu, the Director of Cross-Sectorial Cooperation Directorate of ASEAN Secretariat, Mr. Larry Maramis, the Charge d'Affaires of the European Union Delegation to Thailand, Mrs. Lisa Rager, the Diplomatic Counselor of the French government and Ambassador of COP21 for Asia, His Excellency Ambassador Philip Seller. Distinguished guests, colleagues and friends, it is my great pleasure to welcome all of you to this regional forum of climate change. A little more than a year ago, the French government and the Asian Institute of Technology embarked on this mission to hold a climate change forum for the Southeast Asia region, which would seek to contribute to the widely anticipated COP21 in Paris in December this year. This idea was presented to the European Union and also to ASEAN Secretariat, who were immediately enthusiastic about it. And this is how the core structures of the Regional Forum on Climate Change was conceived. In the months following the initial discussions, our other partners come aboard, complementing our strength and making a formidable team. The efforts and hard work by these partners through the scientific and organizing committees has culminated into this day. I must take a moment to laud them for a job well done. Right from the onset, we were very keen that this forum would have its own unique identity and not get lost in the maze of similar events. To be able to do so, we had a series of concerted discussions in regard to the climate agenda and the need of this region. Two key aspects that came up in almost every discussion. They are, first, we are convinced that both climate change mitigation and adaptations are equally important to address the threat of climate change. This is reflected in the title of this forum, Low Carbon and Climate Resilient Society. Secondly, a good number of scientific solutions on climate change problems are already exist everywhere. So are some of the relevant policies. However, there appears to be some disconnect between the two, especially in this region. What is also missing is the effective implementations of identified solutions and good practices. This is reflected in the title through Bridging Science, Practice and Policy. Climate change is a serious threat. It has a potential to cause irreversible damage to our planet. Our tomorrow depends on the choices we make today. As you can well imagine, these choices are very crucial. What is needed is that our choices are judicious and are grounded in sound scientific principles. This forum aims to provide all of us here with a platform to discuss various elements of climate change problems, which are required to make those choices and to help ease the translation of science into policy and into practices. I'm pleased to inform that we have more than 400 participants from over 20 countries. In this auditorium, we see I'm sure more than 300, and more will come tomorrow. A total of 20 scientific and technical sessions with 115 presentations are to be held over the next 2 days and a half. In addition, there will be 7 side events organized by 4 partner organizations. Exhibition and poster presentations are organized on the first and second days, respectively. The forum participants are a wonderful mix of scientists, practitioners, and policymakers, something that is very unique in its own right. I urge all of us here to make full use of this opportunity to have cross-sectorial discussions, to interact among scientists, practitioners, and policymakers. In order for us to develop a multi-perspective and holistic understanding of the pressing climate change concerns. Many of you have traveled from far away to participate in this forum. So please feel at home in Thailand. And also at AAT, we are a small institute. We have volunteers who can take you around the campus and assist you with anything you want. In conclusion, I once again welcome all of you to this forum and hope you will both benefit from and contribute to this very important forum. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Warsak. And now I would like to invite Dr. Pishet Durong-Kowerod once again to deliver a welcoming speech.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think we have heard about climate change over and over again, not only in this get-together, but throughout the years. We had so many COPs. We have so many discussions. I send my staff every year to participate in COPs, especially in the technology transfer sessions. And usually coming back to report to me that not much has been agreed. I think we have to face the fact that this is something that the global community would have to deal with, would have to manage, and would have to do something. Whether we are convinced or not, many countries, including Thailand, are facing something real, something that a lot of times can be connected to climate change, and something that affect our population at large. So we will be prepared you face the consequence, no matter what COP's result would come out, because it's happening every day. Let me tell you that 4 years ago we had what we call a century flood, and it took us over a month to get over the consequence. The government was practically shut down. Many industries are affected, especially at the outskirts of Bangkok, got their heavy equipment drowned in their first floor and basement. Even automobile companies, large ones, there are pictures of many hundreds of newly assembled cars lying beneath the water. Most, if not all of which, had to be destroyed after the flood. We were afraid at that time that as a consequence of that big flood, many big industries, especially multinational companies that have their bases in Thailand for many decades, would move out of our country because of this big flood. So it's something real. It's not something that we imagine, and it's something that the government, whatever government, has to cope with. And the situation at that time, if you were in some of the situations, it's very hectic. It's very confusing, especially the first few weeks. So many agencies involved, so many data to believe or not believe. And at the end, we come to the conclusion that something needs to be implemented. A lot of corporations need to be weaved together. Maybe at some point, we need to have some sort of a single command office to handle this. So this is experience that have passed us and hopefully would not come back, but we cannot be sure. This year we have another story. We have drought, and we expect that it will hit us pretty badly. The drought comes in many styles. Partly it's historical, because drought does not only mean no rain or less rain this year, but it also refers to water management system in the past few years. Water in the dam, especially large dams, some of which have only 30 or 40% water left. AIT should know very well about this. Drought also affects us because of the farming system. We have annual crops, especially Thailand as rice grower, but we also have off-season crops. We have off-season crops of rice. And a lot of times, in normal days, normal years, the government would not have any objection to off-season crop, because it's something that would bring revenues, additional revenues to farmers. But government also realized that we cannot let this go on naturally in abnormal years, especially when apparently drought is coming. From forecasting, from all the atmospheric figuring out. But this is social issue. It's not only environmental issue. How can you tell the farmers not to do something to get revenues? You cannot. The harsh way is to say there's no water for you for your off-season crop, which is not so nice as a government to speak to farmers. But the reality is there's no water. As a government, it's a very, very tough situation indeed. How the government can assist, how the government can help in this difficult situation. To add to more confusion and problems, here comes brackish water. The salt water is seeping in with the fresh water, and it starts to affect not only the agriculture but the livelihood. For example, water used in hospital cannot be brackish, something that we also have to cope with. So the government at the moment is trying very hard to address this particular issue with the initial initiatives in order to help the population, especially in the north and the northeast. We have encouraged community levels to look into building or digging the so-called retention ponds. In Thailand, we call it monkey cheeks. The retention ponds in community level will certainly help at the micro scale irrigation. And it also would help the communities to work together in order to come up with a longer term and more sustainable water, community level water management system. I encourage you to, if you have time, to go into some of the rural areas where they have been very successful in controlling or in administering their annual water system. One community in Buriram province suffered from drought, from floods for over 40 years. After they have learned, especially through best practices, technologies that they can deploy. And when you talk about technology, we are not just talking about appropriate technology. High technology can also be involved in rural development. In this case, it's a village called Ban Lim Thong. And you go there and you see villagers looking at satellite images, showing their colleagues or neighboring villages how to use satellite images and aerial images in order to identify how water flow in times of flood. They can also take you to a concrete road built specifically to address this. In normal days, this particular street can be used for vehicles, for passengers, for cargo. In flood days, the village agreed totally that no cars will be allowed. It's the waterway, it's the floodway. And this street has many branches, exits, some of which would go into the monkey cheeks, some into each individual fields, and a lot will go to the central reservoirs. They also face the problem of the dirt and the gravels that would fill up their reservoirs after a period of time. So the villagers come up with the innovative ideas of digging a small pond in order to trap these gravels or this dirt before entering the big reservoirs, because they cannot handle digging the big reservoir every year. So things like this is something that we need to realize, that it's not only central planning, but it's also how to encourage villages, communities to get together and solve their problems with the help of the central knowledge, central technologies, for instance. We also need to look at our groundwater more, even though we know that we should not do too many of them. But in this kind of crisis, groundwater is one of the solutions. The desalination system and even the examination of alternative crops that consume little or less water to replace the rice growing. It's something that we also need to do. Apart from this, the water conservation, of course. Certainly, this is just one of the examples that Thailand would try to do more and get the whole communities involved. Now, we also have listened to so many contents about climate change. IPCC have been telling us about the degree rise in global temperature, 2% centigrade, 2 degrees centigrade, if we are careful, above 2 degrees centigrade if we are not careful. Climate change also features among the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, or SDG, which are a proposed set of targets relating to future international development. SDG 13 recommends to take urgent action to combat climate change and its impacts. The World Economic Forum 2014 also reports failure of climate change mitigation and adaptation among the global risks of highest concern. Even in Europe, in 2011, climate change was a major cause of concern for the European public, identified by the Eurobarometer survey conducted in that year, which revealed that the majority of Europeans believe that climate change is the second most serious issue facing the world after poverty, hunger, and lack of drinking water, and a more serious problem than the economic situation. I don't know whether this is true today. Let me also highlight the fact that at the regional level, a number of studies, especially that reported by ADB, suggest that Southeast Asia is one of the vulnerable regions in the world to climate change, and probably one of the most vulnerable if we talk about ASEAN plus 6, which amount to half of the world population. The consequence of climate change for Asia Pacific, as identified by ADB, consists of a number of items. For example, decreasing freshwater availability, particularly in large river basins. And Mekong River is a case in point that we have to be careful because it involves the livelihood of 4 or 5 countries along the river. The rising sea levels, as you well know, the increasing risk of flooding in coastal areas, the growing pressures for large-scale migration, jeopardizing sources of livelihood, particularly for the poor in highly vulnerable areas, increasing health risks from heat waves, vector-borne diseases, and water shortages and contamination, as well as deepening economic damage from the combined and cumulative effects of these impacts. Coming from the Ministry of Science and Technology, let me highlight just a few things that we have been doing in response to climate change. During these past 2 years, we have involved ourselves in the so-called technology needs assessment for climate change. And we have come up with 4 areas of technology needs that Thailand deemed important to our not only economic but also social development. Let me name a few. When we talk about mitigation of climate change, Thailand is very much concerned with agricultural sector. And here we want to do at least 3 things. One is precision farming technologies, planting the right seed in the right place at the right time. We need also to do crop improvement technologies, adapting plants to the effects of climate change. And in agriculture, it will be most useful if we have the forecasting and early warning system. Technologies would help to decide on the timing of specific farming at the seasonal forecast. Secondly, Thailand thinks that water resource management is very important. And here we want to do three things. One is networking and management of infrastructure. Two is seasonal climate prediction. And this will involve numerical models for analysis or forecast of weather, surface and groundwater runoffs and levels, and water quality as well. We also need to do sensor web using observation and modeling data. This is some kind of warning technology which is necessary to prepare appropriate response to mitigate disaster impact. The third item that we think is important is modeling capability. We need to have good data center. We need to have data transfer, and especially the synthesis or the collection of data from several agencies together as one, and have a single evaluation or analysis for decision making system. We also need to have advanced research, weather research and forecasting research. Last but not least, we also look into energy sector, and this in particular would address more mitigation than adaptation. Here we have 4 items that we think will be useful for Thailand for the energy sector to cope with climate change. First one is with regard to smart grid. The combination of power system and telecommunication system, making it more intelligent for us to make sure that we use our energy efficiently. Second is biofuels. Many major companies in Thailand nowadays is facing something very strange. For example, in the sugarcane industry, the sugar company has been enjoying very good export of sugar, but not today. Today, about half of their revenues come from biofuels, from bagasse. So things can change, as one of you have mentioned about disruptive. And disruptive technology is also another thing that we have to keep in mind. Third item is with regard to high efficiency boiler. This is purely technical. But to make sure that it's efficient would mean that so many boilers in the country would help save energy. Last but not least, the so-called carbon capture and storage, or CCS. Technology and process for capturing carbon dioxide from large point source such as fossil fuel power plants, transporting it to a storage site, depositing it where it will not enter the atmosphere. Having said all this, I'd like to conclude by saying that according to my observation, what human being is addressing at the moment comes very close to what His Majesty the King of Thailand has offered to the Thai population, the so-called sufficiency economy philosophy. The reason I say this is because I feel that what we are dealing with is pretty much trying to attain the middle path. And by sufficiency economy, His Majesty refers to 3 pillars of thinking. The first pillar is moderation. Not to do too little, not to do too much. By the way, sufficiency economy does not mean that we need to be poor, we can be rich, but at a moderation level. And moderation not at the expense of oneself and not at the expense of others. Second pillar is the so-called reasonableness or due consideration. We do things rationally. We concern not only outputs, but also outcomes. The third pillar is with regard to immunity from both internal and external shocks. This can be applied not only climate change, financial shocks we have encountered for so many times in the past few decades. And by immunity, we talk about be prepared, keeping moderation intact, doing things with reasonableness, and all these have to come with knowledge and with moral or virtue. And by moral and virtue, we are talking about honesty. We need to be honest when we talk about climate change. We need to be patient. It takes a long time for many things to happen or not happen. We have to be diligent, and last but not least, using our wisdom. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Pichette, for that wonderful keynote speech. May I now request Professor Warasak to deliver tokens of appreciation to all the speakers and take a group picture on the stage. And now for the group picture. As you may know, we have various interesting exhibition booths and a photo exhibit of AFD, or French Agency for Development, entitled 60 Solutions, all located in the lobby. In a few moments, I will invite Dr. Pichette to cut the ribbon to officially open the exhibition portion of the forum. This will be followed by the lunch break. There will be 3 areas for lunch. For those who have religious restrictions, the vegetarian and halal food will be located on the first floor. And for others, the other two lunch